We are, of course, aware of the sentencing that has taken place for the murder of Sara Sharif. Joining us, Alex Dibble, who is Deputy Head of News here at Talk. I mean, Alex, we all know about this case now. It's a deeply disturbing case. Just remind us a little of the background that led up to these three people ending up at the Old Bailey.
So Sara Sharif was a 10-year-old girl who lived in Woking in Surrey, and she died in August last year. The day after she died, her father, her stepmother and her step-siblings all fled the country to Pakistan. Her father made a 999 call to Surrey police from Islamabad in Pakistan, confessing to killing his daughter and instructing the police as to where Sara's body could be found. The police went to her home, found Sara's body there. And what transpired later very quickly as tests were done on her body was the abuse and the torture that she had suffered in the months and indeed now we know the years leading up to her death. There was a huge manhunt in Pakistan for her family. They ended up returning to the UK, were arrested the moment they touched down, and that was when legal proceedings really began in earnest against them. They were put on trial for murder. Urfan Sharif, Beinash Batool and Faisal Malik being Sara's uncle. They were found guilty last week, although Faisal Malik was not found guilty of murder. And today they were sentenced.
These are substantial sentences. They're life sentences. That was always going to happen for the father and the stepmother. But I think some people thought that given that the judge could have given longer sentences, that were made, and by definition of how utterly, sadly not completely unprecedented, but how utterly horrific and violent this young girl's life was, what she endured for those 2 or 3 years before she died from injuries sustained after an attack by her dad. 40 years, he will probably die in jail, but there was a sense that there might even be a whole life tariff attached to this.
Yeah, and that's what judges have to do. They have to weigh the crime against the sentencing guidelines. The judge made a point of saying that the sentence was in no way a reflection of the value of Sara's life or should be taken as such. He made that very clear. Faisal Malik will spend 16 years at least. Urfan Sharif, his brother, 40. That means Urfan Sharif will be in his early 80s if he is still alive before he's even eligible for parole. The starting point was 30 years, and the judge said that is the starting point, it is not the end point. He then proceeded to list more than a dozen aggravating factors, which in his mind increased the term to 40. He did the same with Beinash Batool, although because Urfan Sharif was the primary person who was responsible for the suffering and inflicted the greatest amount of suffering on Sara, he received the 40-year sentence. Beinash Batool received 33. One thing, though, that became clear is that there were many people, I think, who weren't fully aware of what Sara had gone through until they listened through to the judge's sentencing remarks today. I mean, there's a lot that we have to leave out, but for you know, just to protect people's consciences almost and their minds as they listen to this case. But one of the things that was mentioned today by the judge was that occasionally Urfan Sharif would wake his daughter in the middle of the night in order to inflict physical punishment on her. And the effect that must have had on a 10-year-old girl, knowing that when she fell asleep, that was not necessarily the end of her suffering for that day. It's just horrific. You intended that she had a life filled with misery, the judge said to Urfan Sharif before he told him to stand up and receive his sentence. So the true extent, I think, of what Sara went through, and indeed the judge said that he was spending so long, it took an hour for his sentencing remarks, more than an hour, and he said he was spending so long on it in order to pay tribute to Sara.
Alex, thank you. Alex Dibble, Talk's Deputy Head of News here on the programme. Let's get a call on this very issue. Michael is in Sunderland. What would you like to say, Michael? Hi.
Yeah, when are we going to have proper sentences to protect the children of this country? Like I say, it's poor Sara, right? And I think it's 40 years, what they should look at is that poor girl was only 10. Let's say she lived the average, we say 50 or 60 years. That's what the sentence should be. They should give that to the person who's killed her. 40, 50 years. Okay, but what I'm getting at is, on today's news, he gets 40 years, somebody who downloaded thousands of sexual images is getting a 2-year suspended sentence. Also, is already a convict.
Look, we will never be able to make sense of it. You may remember the murder of Ellie Edwards, who was gunned down on Christmas Eve in the Wirral outside a pub. She was in a crowd when this absolute madman called Connor Chapman opened fire. She happened to get shot in this. He was a very violent it was a gang feud thing. Now, he got 48 years, Michael. Now, it's not a race in this respect, but you do think that given just that one example, then surely this case would have been at least 48 years based on that. But we don't necessarily always have this parity between sentencing.
Exactly, but what I'm saying is it's like I'm not about two-tier justice. I'm just talking about these children are the future of this country.
I totally agree. If you're
stand up for them, and who's going to protect them when you've got stupid laws given 2-year suspended sentence? I think it'd start at 10 or 15. Anything to do with a child. Anything to do with pornography.
100%. And one of the reasons, and Michael, thank you for that, one of the reasons, as I understand it, that there aren't more people jailed for downloading child porn is that there are too many people doing it, that there just isn't enough prison places for the amount of people committing the offence. I mean, that in itself deserves further investigation, but it's easily accessible these days. This stuff just drips out of people's phones at the tap of a button. And it's so prolific, it's so common, that it's almost a rarity to go to jail for downloading child... but it's not even... These are sex offences against child. These are sexual assaults against children. Calling it child pornography doesn't really... In fact, it misplaces it in another category. These are horrendous cases of sexual violence towards children, and you don't go to jail for downloading and watching. I mean, I find that shocking. I find it shocking that, we could look at any number of murder cases and see somebody getting more time than this animal has just received. Urfan Sharif, 42, has got a 40-year sentence. Yeah, all right, he's going to die in jail. I doubt whether this bloke's ever going to see the light of day. I mean, that would be a minimum sentence. But I mentioned the case of Connor Chapman, who rightly, by the way, got 48 years. It wasn't a whole life tariff, but a minimum of 48 years. His argument would have been, yes, I fired a gun. I didn't mean to specifically kill anyone. Well, you fire a gun into a crowd. Yes, you did. You might think if you were comparing the two, and I know that's dangerous in law to sort of start comparing cases, but just based on that one example, that the case of poor Sara and the example that Alex Dibble just gave us of just an example, the sort of violence this young girl suffered, it's just a level of premeditated brutality. I am staggered that I don't know what you'd have to do to get a whole life tariff. They're quite unusual whole life tariffs, but I would have thought this would be one. I mean, this was an absolute violent, psychopathic maniac. This man was an animal. He was an abuser of children. This isn't the first example, but it was the last. That's the only bit of light that comes of this.